We want to create an environment where we can keep our children in Galway and allow them to have the opportunity to have a job in Galway and not go somewhere else.
John Breslin, a university professor, co-author of the 3 best-selling Old Ireland in Colour books, co-founder of Boards.ie and the Galway City Innovation District, and recipient of numerous awards for his contributions to business development. He also serves as a director and board member for various organisations. John Breslin, welcome to Garry Talks.
There's obviously challenges with AI, there's the accuracy, there's the energy usage, there's of course, the whole scary Terminator type stuff, if you believe in that. But there is also the opportunity to make the world a better place.
And just on that though as well, if you're creating logos through the AI, who owns the logo?
Good question.
This is a GK Media podcast.
This podcast is part of the GK Media Studios Creators Network, helping people tell their stories. Become a storyteller today and learn about our podcaster network at gkmediastudios.com.
John, thank you so much for coming on and joining me on Garry Talks.
Thanks, Gary.
Delighted to say that today, as we record this episode, Garry Talks reached number 1 in the entrepreneurship category on Apple Podcasts in Ireland. And no better person to have in studio than yourself, who is a serial entrepreneur. And just there at the start, I was talking about all the various initiatives and startups that you're involved in and, co-authoring books with Sarah Ann Buckley. But I wondered, with all those great achievements, what has been some of the bigger challenges that you have faced over the last number of years?
Gary, first of all, congratulations on the number 1. It's fabulous news and a great achievement, and really fabulous to have it and to hear about it, and I'm delighted to be here today. Thanks so much. Challenges are, I suppose, in the world of startups and entrepreneurship. I guess everyone has things they would do differently now than they probably did at the time, and I think one of the kind of big challenges in startups and entrepreneurship in general is focus. When you're an entrepreneur, you kind of are unsure of what to do, and then you sometimes try and do too many different things, or more things than you should be doing. And that's something that I can look back. I often tell people a story about a fantastic startup I was involved in, which was one of the first newsreader apps for the iPad. It was called Streamglider. And we had a fantastic team, serial tech entrepreneurs, 2 of them in the US and myself in Ireland. And we built an amazing platform. However, we also tried to do 3 different things in one. And instead of focusing on one thing, we, I would say a little bit unsure. We didn't really know which direction to go in. There was a lot of shiny objects and things that distracted us. So it's often what I tell people now, kind of having learned a lot more about entrepreneurship, both through education and so on, is focus both on the product, single product, a single type of customer, having everybody on the same page, knowing what you're doing, and not trying to do too many things is a good starting point.
And what should you be focusing on?
Well, you should be focused on the customer. There's a great process I use from MIT called disciplined entrepreneurship, and the person who came up with it is a guy called Bill Audit, and he always asks students, what's the sole sufficient condition for having a business? And people always can answer, okay, I'm not going to ask you. So you tell me, what's the sole sufficient condition for having a business? Putting you on the spot. And everyone answers this wrong. Like if you ask me, I'd give you the wrong answer. But when you think about it, you suddenly...
Well, I think for me, it's finding a solution for the end user.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's nearly there. And I bet you didn't think
I feel like I'm in college again.
Put on the spot. Yeah. I'm going to ask a few questions.
Okay.
Yeah. No, Gary. Stop slouching there at the back. Anyway, his point is it's a paying customer. Or in fact, it's not just one paying customer, it's many paying customers. And it makes sense when you think about it. We had a great visitor in Galway this week, a guy called Paul Cheek, and he asked a very similar question. He asked us, who's the best investor in the world? And of course, everyone answers, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, some VC firm. But of course, the answer is your customers, because if they don't believe in your product, you might as well forget about it.
Yeah.
So to back to your question in terms of focus, the answer is you have to focus on the customers that are going to pay you for what you're about to make.
Yeah.
And a similar example of challenges, I suppose, when I was involved in boards.ie, I had this kind of grand vision that we could sort of expand it out to other countries and have a boards.us and a boards UK and a boards New Zealand. And I went and bought all these domain names for different territories. And very much a case of build it and they won't come. You can't just suddenly create a website. It's like creating an app in the App Store and expecting everybody's going to use it. There's always this fallacy that, I'm going to make this app and it's going to be in the App Store, and then suddenly it's going to be number one, like a podcast. You're going to make a podcast and it's going to be in the podcast store and it's going to be number one. That takes a lot of work, as I know. I did podcasts, 10, 15 years ago, so I know kind of the challenges involved in terms of getting traction. So it's certainly not a case of building the day will come. You really have to plan. You have to sort of understand the customer, understand what they want, understand their priorities, and design towards that.
The interesting thing about boards.ie, as you mentioned, is it was there was nothing like it at the time. It was a place where you could go and have discussions and conversations about anything that you wanted to start up as a topic.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, as well, that was, I think, when we got to also see the darkness of the web in terms of, like you have stuff now in Ireland where there'd be people just picking at, celebrities or influencers and so on. And it still is continuing to this day. And even last night I was having a conversation with my 11-year-old because she wants to have a YouTube channel and so on, about the darker side where people just, start bullying you online. And you would have seen that as well, I suppose, with boards.ie.
Yeah, and I suppose, there's, the web mirrors the real world, but I suppose the difference between it and the real world is that there is more of a permanence and a kind of a accessibility to. So, we know in society there's always been good people and bad people who say bad things, writing poison pen letters and so on. But there wasn't the same kind of permanence about that because it just went away or was happening between two individuals. So with the network effect and everything that happens online, there's a lot more, exposure to the bad things. And of course, it makes it easier for people to, if they want to do bad things, do that, I suppose with boards, like any online social media site. And, we do think of it in Ireland as being sort of the precursor to social media. It was, we set up the company in 2000, but I'd been running it as a games discussion forum from 1998 onwards. And, there's obviously challenges in terms of moderation that's still challenged today for any content, whether it's YouTube or different social media platforms. You always have a couple of keyboard warriors who are at home and just, this is a way that they can make themselves heard and make people feel important. And you have to try and balance it with, I suppose now it's easier to do somewhat because you can set up automated systems and use AI and so on. But at the time, it was a lot of human intervention, and we built systems. We had a very simple thing called Muppet check, which used to kind of
love it.
It used to check for a person who is causing trouble and scan for similar IP addresses and other usernames, and then it would allow you to kind of mass block at a time. So a couple of innovations that my colleagues and boards came up with that basically were created to try and tackle this.
So is there a lot of Muppets in Ireland?
Well, it was a kind of common, it was a phrase we used to use in the gaming circles. I don't know why. It was just kind of one of those words that came in. But then, of course, it's, you hear it a lot in Ireland anyway. But I suppose I would again balance that with the positives. And, in boards, there were so many enlightening and encouraging stories of clubs being formed. I was driving, but I saw a cyclist on the Mycullen bypass in Galway a few weeks ago, and he was wearing a boards.ie pink cycling t-shirt. Wow. And I kind of almost want to stop and say, who are you and where did you get that from and what's the backstory? Because I don't know everything that's going on in boards. I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis. But
did you sell the business?
Yeah, we sold this a number of years ago to Distilled Media, which is the company behind Daft. So quite some time back, Daft invested in boards and in adverts because they saw adverts especially being aligned to their kind of core business. And as you probably know, Distilled now own adverts, Done Deal. So they have this kind of portfolio of similar types of websites for buying and selling.
And have you done financially better, without giving figures, with the selling of the like of boards.ie and adverts.ie than you have as a professor in university.
No, I suppose professors are well paid. There's public pay scales. You can see exactly what professors in different universities are paid. But I did okay, and it helped me to pay off mortgages and that kind of thing, which would have taken longer otherwise. So, I'm not a millionaire or multimillionaire by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely helped to do those kind of things. And there kind of came a point in time where we said it was right time to sell, but also we'd been approached by different people before that, and there was also sort of a mindset in terms of does somebody you're selling to or aligning with, because it was kind of for a while it was sort of a buy-in before a full buyout. Do they share similar values? Mm-hmm. Because we've been approached by different entities and companies, and there just wasn't that alignment. We just said no, even though there was money on the table. Yeah. Sometimes you have to kind of feel who's the best match. And the same with investing in companies. Like if you're a startup and you're trying to get an investor, you're trying to find a person who seems to have that sort of synergy, because you don't want to have problems later on down the line with just somebody who isn't thinking the same as you or aligned to you. So, we kind of felt, I suppose, at the time that the positives of boards, and there's many positives, as I was mentioning, whether it's people cycling or soccer teams or people getting married, there's been so many positive stories. Even in the past year or two, somebody said, oh yeah, I know X and Y, and they met through boards and they got married. Even 20 years later, you hear these kind of stories. It's very encouraging.
Yeah. And just talking about entrepreneurship and online apps and everything like that, you're working with the next generation of entrepreneurs. You've students coming into university, studying various subjects, and some of them very keen on wanting to be an entrepreneur. And there's kind of two things that I want to talk to you about. One is that when they go online, especially on apps like TikTok, they see these influencers who are millionaires before the age of 25, and they're, flying first class or private jets, and they have the fancy watches and the fancy cars, and they're seeing all this. And there's also this appetite to, build a business and sell it quick, make your money quick. And it's become trendy, entrepreneurism, compared to even when I was in college. What are you seeing on the ground every day with these people? And is my assumption correct? Is that what reflects, do you think?
Yeah, my kind of guess is that a bit like people being exposed to dark content, or people who are doing the wrong things because of the nature of online, that there's probably a portion of, let's say, those young successful entrepreneurs that are being promoted or more visible to young people. However, my understanding is that the average age of a successful entrepreneur is older. It's kind of 40. I don't have the exact age, but it's definitely not 25. It's 40 plus. I'm not saying it's always over 40. There's going to be exceptions. Obviously, there's going to be younger ones and there's going to be older ones, but it may not be reflective of the bigger picture. That's probably the first thing. But there's no doubt that entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur is a hot topic. And this kind of goes back, it's not even 5 years. We're talking kind of more like 20 years. And it's because of Facebook and the social network and those types of tech companies set up by young, successful people. We have the Collisons from Ireland, great role models, and people look at that and say, I can do it too, which is great. You want people to be inspired by people they see and to think that they can do this themselves. And I know many young entrepreneurs who've founded, been very successful in companies before the age of 30, and they are there. But it's not always a case of, as I said, kind of, I'm an entrepreneur now and now I have a successful business. There's obviously a lot more to it. And one of the things I strongly believe in is you take that spirit, which is people wanting to be entrepreneurs, and then you give them the frameworks and the supports and the platforms to actually de-risk what they're creating. And that's usually through education. Like my thoughts here align very strongly to what MIT propose in terms of giving this structured entrepreneurship education or disciplined entrepreneurship skills to people, because if you can follow a process, it's a lot easier to make those decisions and to have that focus that I talked about earlier on, and not to rush into building the app or the technology or the something that people don't want. So that's really kind of what I see we probably need to do more of in Ireland. You know, there was a lot of talk in recent weeks about the Mario Draghi report, which kind of goes on about the lack of innovation and startups and unicorns and I suppose research and development making its way into successful big companies in Europe. And I think we do a lot of great stuff in the science technology fields, but there's probably more that needs to be done there in terms of taking that into a successful business. And in the US, they probably are a little bit further ahead in terms of those education skills that help you to bring that business forward. So I don't think it's as simple as that, but I suppose to try and catch up in Europe and in Ireland, we probably need to deliver more in terms of that structured entrepreneurship education that is now starting to emerge. And there are leaders in Ireland that are really taking up this challenge.
Like, it's good to have a business that is sellable, that someone wants it and someone can invest more and grow it. But is it the right attitude to go in to start up a business because you can sell it?
It's a very personal thing. And, we had a great talk in Galway some years back from Jerry Kennelly, who had this many businesses, but one of them was basically a large photo archive. I think his father worked as a newspaper photographer, so he built up this huge archive and he sold it to Getty Images. And he said at the time, there was a lot of this kind of, oh, why did you sell? Kind of almost kind of a cop out,
Yeah.
And he said that basically people have to do what they feel is right at that point in time. Like if you kind of said to me, oh, why didn't you stay involved in boards and, grow it into a worldwide empire? I suppose at that point in time, it was kind of a side project. I'd moved into academia and research full time. I wasn't in a place to do that. And there's, it really, I think it's kind of a personal thing. Now, on the flip side, we also want to try and encourage people to build those companies and not sell out to, some larger corporate in US, because we lose that kind of entity in Europe and innovation and so on. So I suppose you're trying to see, well, what are we missing there that would allow us to build and keep those larger businesses in Europe? So understanding it's not for everybody, that some people would just want to build and sell and that's their kind of thing. But to understand there are other people who want to build and keep and grow jobs. Sometimes people do this for the very good reasons of, having a long-term vision for where they are and where they live and wanting to kind of see that growth and job creation in the area they're in. And that might be for their own kids. Like with the Portishead, which I'm involved in, we often say we want to create an environment where we can keep our children in Galway and allow them to have the opportunity to have a job in Galway and not go somewhere else. Same thing for an entrepreneur who has that kind of long-term vision for their region. If they can be encouraged and supported to, do that and not sell out, great. If they have to do it for personal reasons, fine,
Yeah.
I think you have to, it's not an all or nothing approach. You want to kind of be able to facilitate what's right,
Yeah.
while still encouraging, while still having the possibility to allow those people who want to grow and keep what they are making in Ireland or in Europe there as well.
Yeah. It's interesting to say, that we can grow an environment here where there's jobs for our children, because again, if we go back to the 80s in Ireland, it was just common for everyone just to mass immigrate,
Yeah.
And that the conversation really has changed over the last couple of decades, where it's like, let's actually create an environment and a culture where people are supported and want to stay here and build their own businesses and work.
Yeah, it's the usual case of adversity creates opportunity, or, when something is kind of not going right, you kind of try and think, well, what can I do to make that better? So, as you say, people leaving Ireland in the 80s, obviously we had the digital deck leading to the creation of new companies in Galway, and adversity now in many areas in Europe, whether it's war or health or whatever, makes new things happen. Obviously you prefer if they didn't happen, but sometimes there are unexpected positive consequences out of negative things. So for us in Galway, like I suppose thinking of that, and one of the things I observed when I got involved in the Portishead and the Galway City Innovation District was a lot of companies coming to Galway with IDA, who do an amazing job bringing FDI into the region, and going away because they didn't see the right things existing here for them. So that's really what led to the creation of the Portishead and the Galway City Innovation District, was our aim to try and keep those jobs in Galway and not have them going elsewhere. So I had many stories that there was one company that really I kind of resonated with, and it was because of Boars. I think it was a moderation company that was from California, and they'd come to visit Galway and they'd visit other places, and they seemed to have a need for a certain type of thing downtown, this kind of cool hub. It just didn't exist at the time. And that sort of really struck kind of to my heart. I kind of, probably just because I liked the company, and again I knew what they were doing because of moderation and boards and so on. And there were other similar examples. We've been told of Airbnb and other kind of companies that had come and gone away. Oh, wow. So we basically said, well, what can we do here? And it was out of that sort of, it wasn't quite a diversity, but definitely was a problem that was becoming more apparent, that we needed to try and step in and make something happen.
Yeah, and then you do have like American companies in the city like Rent the Runway.
There is kind of yes, they didn't, okay, some existed downtown, but there's a lot more downtown. You've seen companies kind of coming like Matworks and Rent the Runway and so on. And of course, there's Diligent and Genesis having acquired our local company, AltaCloud. So those are clustering downtown. And I remember one particular large US company that came on one of these visits, and they flew in on their private jet to Shannon. They couldn't land in Galway because it wasn't open, and you wouldn't have landed the jet in Galway anyway. But I'd given I was giving the presentation about the university and all our great courses and our research and so on. But
and who was pulling you in to be involved in this?
IDA.
Okay.
So often university people would help with IDA visits as subject matter experts for certain areas. So let's say a company's coming in and they want tech people, they'll probably bring in people from computer science or engineering to kind of say, here's our graduates, here's who we have, here's what they do.
So they literally pull together a lobby who can pitch to these potential
and
investors.
it's a fabulous, of course, it makes sense, and this happens all over the country, so they will bring in either other companies that would be in similar spaces to kind of give their story, and they'll bring in academics. So you think about it, skills and talent is a big draw for companies here. Even if you're a startup or growing a scale up coming from Europe to Ireland, or deciding you want to move to Ireland, you still want to have the same types of things. You want to have skills and students and a nice place to live, of course.
Yeah.
So these guys flew in on their jet. They came up to Galway, gave them the university spiel. But it was really when I started talking about the Galway City Innovation District and our vision for the Portishead that they kind of sat up, and you could almost see the checkbooks coming out. And they did actually locate downtown after that, because they knew that their employees wanted to be in the city centre, close to everything. Yeah. And they could also see this kind of bigger vision for a startup community, essentially. There's a great book from Brad Feld on startup communities, which is describing what they did in Boulder, Colorado to create the whole kind of startup ecosystem there.
Oh, wow.
And he's a thesis, which is essentially, you want the people, the entrepreneurs who have a long-term vision for their region to be the leaders. You want to have, constant events engaging the whole community. You want to be inclusive of the whole community, and so on and so on. And there's kind of 3 or 4 points. But we looked at that and said, well, what can we do here in Galway that sort of aligns to that? Okay, there are different cities. Just happens there's actually a big medtech sector in Boulder as well. But can you take those principles and apply them here? And I said to you earlier on, if you want to try and encourage somebody to not sell and to build a company and grow jobs in the area, then those are the type of people, I suppose, that you would be trying to include in that kind of startup community as well.
I've been invited into universities before to do mock interviews with students.
Yeah.
And I can see clearly if, some of them are on the wrong path, and I'll softly give them my opinion as much as I can to maybe shed light in another area that I think is more suited to them or whatever, and let them take that on board and make their own decision.
You mean in terms of kind of a career area? So you're saying you're not suited to this career and you should be doing something else?
Yeah. So for instance, there might be someone who's doing marketing and they loved TikTok and they're all about TikTok, but they're not on Instagram. They have a presence on LinkedIn, but they don't go on LinkedIn. They're not on Facebook because they don't like Facebook. So, and the conversation goes on, but they love marketing, and they want to do marketing because they just love one app called TikTok. And it was a discussion about, there's traditional marketing, you need to have a holistic view. And this is me only just coming in every so often meeting these students, but you're with them on a weekly basis. Can you see, from having conversations with people, yes, you would be a good entrepreneur, you would be a good business leader. And then there's others who might be standing out as clear as daylight of this probably isn't the right path for you.
Yeah, so like I mainly teach engineering and computer science students, but even within that cohort, there are people who will come to you in first year who are, entrepreneurially minded. They have their business, they're very driven in a certain area, and straight away that they are going to continue and keep being involved in that area.
Is that because they're so sure of themselves? Is that the key thing?
It's that. It's maybe having been exposed to it early. Maybe it's having had somebody in the family that you just kind of, were inspired by. I think there's different reasons for it. Having said that, I think there are people, and you mentioned the example of the person who would love to be a marketer because of TikTok. I don't know, I'm theorizing here now, but I'm imagining that just as some people can become entrepreneurs, some people can become marketers if they are given the right set of skills. So they shouldn't be limited to just because the fact that they like TikTok and they know how it works and they can, optimize and schedule and create the short form content. And I've done a little bit myself to try and play around with it and see what kind of works and what doesn't work. I don't think that means that they could not learn how to use other platforms and market using those and learn inbound marketing and all the other kind of newer techniques, inbound sales and so on. So in the same way with entrepreneurship, my kind of feeling is that there are people who just, are and do and will do, but there are many other people who could do it if they knew more about it. So I was at a session yesterday called The Future of Entrepreneurship in DCU. And this is a thing which I've said many times myself and I've heard from MIT, but another person from a company called Beta I said exactly the same thing. And I said, oh, he gets it. And he basically said that if you learn entrepreneurship, even if you don't become an entrepreneur yourself, you can apply those skills in whatever area you go into. And I often say that in terms of this disciplined entrepreneurship, structured entrepreneurship, because whether you're, Gary Kelly or you are John Breslin in academic institution or you are some up and coming new music artist, you can apply those skills because in the end of the day, you're going to be selling something or providing a service to somebody. And if you don't understand your customer and what they want and what their priorities are, you're not going to be able to make or sell or produce or invest in that product very, very well.
Yeah.
So that understanding of the customer, which is core to entrepreneurship, applies across any job you'll have in the future, whether it's a nonprofit or not. So back to the original question, in terms of the students and what I'm seeing, I would like if they had some exposure to entrepreneurship, just as many students learn statistics. We all do stats courses and different things in commerce and engineering and science, so on. As a kind of a fundamental type of thing you learn just because you can apply it to different areas. Well, why not learn entrepreneurship as a fundamental course? Why not get the kind of the skills and the basics there? Because I'm convinced, even if you had 2 days exposure to a structured way of being entrepreneurial, it would be less scary because, let's face it, there are separate worlds. Ireland is very separate in many respects. When you're choosing your CAO course at the beginning of your college life or before your college life, it's very, very simple. It's, your parents are usually saying, oh, engineering, doctor, lawyer, it's kind of this sort of broader experiences. Not really, there's no kind of taking a major and minor like they do in the States where you can sort of, be broad and then go narrow. It is very specific from the very beginning. Maybe there are some exceptions, maybe in arts and so on, where you can kind of sort of try different things. But even then, you sort of have an idea of what you're going to do. So you're kind of pushed into the sort of one area kind of very quickly. But if you're exposed to something, so for example, engineering or science, the number of business courses you'll do in that will be probably pretty small. And therefore, you may never be exposed to the world of entrepreneurship unless you either seek it out, like I've seen some people do, or you're given some fundamental skills in that. And as I say, whatever career you go into, and if you're a STEM, science, technology person, you're likely going to be making something that somebody needs, and not understanding entrepreneurship is a big deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. Stops you from being a leader in that field then that you're really working in.
Well, yeah, it makes you a specialist in one area and perhaps not as well versed in other areas. Like an entrepreneur, there's a new book just come out called Startup Tactics from Paul Cheek, who was here in Galway and in Dublin yesterday. And it's very much around this idea of if you're an engineer, for example, you're a specialist in engineering, that's great. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to do many different things. So, you as a business owner, Gary, you will know that you have to basically wear many hats in terms of what you do. You're marketing, you're producing, you're selling, you're
counting.
Doing counting. Yeah. I was doing my taxes at the weekend. So I actually like that because I like when all the numbers come together, but not everybody does. So you have to be able to kind of wear many hats, and you have to be good at them as well. You may never get to expert level, but you have to be proficient enough at many different things to be able to do them. Because if you're a tech entrepreneur, you're going to be trying to build products, sell to people, get investment, all these different things that you would do, sales and so on. So you need to be proficient at a broader range of things. And I think that's kind of another aspect of what entrepreneurship is. There is a certain aspect of building a team. And I kind of think back to boards.ie when we got started. I was a techie geek. I had no idea about accounting or sales or business or any of that kind of stuff. But I managed to team up, by chance, perhaps, with people who had their own business, who knew all that, setting up an entity and the stuff I'd no experience with. So it was a little bit happenstance that the right people came together to make the business happen. Now we can think retrospectively about the kind of the skills and the complementary assets you need in a startup team. And I love the MIT parlance in this because they talk about the hacker, the hustler, and the hipster.
Okay.
So the hipster is the designer, the hacker is the techie person, and the hustler is the business head for sales and so on. So you either have to put those elements together, or you have to try and develop them yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's a good point though as well, because it's more about someone being passionate about something, and then they can learn the other skills that they may need. And I often say, like, I studied film and TV in college, and I came out and I started doing short stocks, and we did a feature film, but we'd no idea how to run a business.
Yeah.
And you have to learn all those variety of skills to a proficient level, not expert, as you said, to be capable of it. Was AI discussed at these conferences you were at this week as well?
Yeah, of course. AI is everywhere. And one of the big premises from this guy, Paul Cheek, was AI was going to basically do away with entrepreneurs. Now he wrote this book I mentioned, Startup Tactics. And when he started writing it, I was actually asking him this. I said, when you started writing this book a year or two ago, ChatGPT and many of these AI systems just did not exist. They were only coming on stream. So you've now seen, I suppose, a huge change in the way people do stuff. Like in the past 2 years, we've seen education changing because, you can't get people to write text assignments anymore because it's just, what's made up and what isn't. Nobody knows. I had
and can you figure that out in university?
Well, there are systems that purportedly tell you, but it's based on certain things, like certain words that are overused in AI generated documents. So I can't even remember the special words.
Yeah.
The teens will tell you, this word is one of them. I've forgotten.
And is it bad then that people use ChatGPT for writing essays in college?
Well, I think if you ask many academics, they would, of course, say it's bad. But I suppose it depends what the purpose of the essays is, or did they learn anything else in addition to that? Did the time they saved doing that make something impactful happen? That's kind of that's a whole other debate, which I don't know if I have the answer to. But for entrepreneurship and businesses, I suppose the thing is you can now use obviously AI to do some of the roles that you did before. So if you want to create a logo, for example, and I love branding, I've been doing logos back 20 years, just
see, we've loads of branding. If we got our mugs or pens or
that's it. Yeah. And I'm a kind of big, my laptop has a kind of all iron color. My mobile phone has a all iron color.
That's lovely, actually.
So it's all about the branding, But of course, you can now tell an AI system to create. We did this recently for a project in the university around sustainable AI to make a logo. Save time. And came up with this kind of brain that was sort of wires in it, and had a nice little thingy. So one of my PhD students mock this up in, jig time, as they say in Ireland, with no effort. And of course, making assets for your business becomes a lot easier because you can give it a logo and you can say, give me some nice background graphics that I can use in my presentations or whatever. So there are certain things that have become easier. But what Paul was saying,
just on that though as well, if you're creating logos through the AI, who owns the logo?
Good question. I don't know. I suppose you could think about it in terms of, you would have to really read the license agreement you have with the platform that you're using from. Yeah.
No one ever reads those things.
No, but if you really were paranoid about it, you would say, this is how I'm going to do it. Now, of course, you could use the platform to generate something that would disappear and you could create something kind of similar to it. I'm sure there's probably ways around it. But yeah, I don't have the answer. I think really would depend on the terms. There are obviously general purpose AI systems that you can do stuff on and they would have quite easily accessible terms, but then people often say, AI, what was I doing recently? Oh yeah, I was looking for an AI system to take, you would like this because you're doing videos and audio all the time, take the audio from a video and use my face and superimpose the audio onto my face. And the reason was, I'd recorded a video, I was giving a talk to a conference in China last week, and I'd spent all the time recording my Zoom video for 45 minutes or whatever, and then at the end of it I realized it hadn't captured my video. So it captured the slides and I had the audio, but of course Zoom, you probably know this better than I, doesn't always capture the speaker video unless you force it to and so on. So I had an hour of content and I just didn't want to do it again. I was so tired. I said, oh God, I can't do this again. And I said, it wouldn't be great now if I had an AI that could take my picture and then make my mouth move to the audio that I've already recorded. And I started looking at different systems, and long story short, there are specialized systems to do things you want them to do, but I couldn't find the right one to do it. And I'm sure if I went to the site and looked at terms and conditions, I would see, do I own this content I'm now creating? Anyway, I had to go back and record little snippets of video and interject them to make it look like I had intentionally done it along the way.
Yeah,
so anyway,
because we did a video recently for someone and they said, oh, we wish just for that last line that he had looked at the camera on the day. I was like, yeah, no problem. Zip, 5 seconds later, the eye line is moved.
Oh, really? Oh, very, very good.
Camera,
and you can use like Photoshop to replace eyes and, closed faces with one from another photograph to have open faces and all this kind of stuff. So it is great what you can do. Who owns it is another question. So the entrepreneur and using AI to assist them in their business, I think we're seeing it pervade many different aspects of what you can do. And the really interesting one that Paul was showing was basically writing your business plan. Your full business plan is being created from a Copilot. They've created this thing called Jetpack. It hasn't been released publicly, but basically you kind of say what your business is and what you're intending to do. And it will create the whole market segmentation, populate all of the information about personas and, so on and so on and so on. And I did ask him, okay, but like the AI generated images, is this good or is it kind of just a starting point, And the obvious thing is, while it may not be perfect now, there will be a point in time where it'll actually be very, very good. And you'll suddenly have, these business plans being generated that you could probably pick up and say, yeah, I'm going to run with that.
Yeah.
And then the other part of that is that all of the roles in the business can start to be replaced in some manner, or at least augmented in some manner by an AI. There will be some, of course, that that can't be done or are more difficult to do. Primary market research, you really have to talk to the people and make sure and validate and, understand them and empathize and so on. But there are probably some of those aspects and other aspects that can be automated in some manner.
But I remember back in, I think it was late 90s, when I had set up my first company. We set up a business while we were in college, so we had something to go straight into when we graduated. And the bank, to open up a bank account, said, bring us in your business plan. I was like, business plan? I don't know what a business plan is. Sure, I'm doing film. Why do I need a business plan? And I remember going online and into libraries to look at business plans and asking people, could I look at their business plan? And you're trying to compare different business plans to see. And it was the most laborious, exhausting, to a degree, I think, pointless exercise, because I felt that I was just making up stuff and putting in stuff to make the end user happy that this was a business plan. Where, with AI, with a business plan being generated, it's doing all the work for you. Yes, it's saving time, but it's doing all the work for you. So a proper business plan is being created. It's up to that person then to go and read it, do a deep dive, make sure it
course.
makes sense and aligns with what they want to do and the core values and all that. Because any good person then who has a business plan pushed across the table to them should be able to read it and interrogate the other person to make sure that they really are the true essence
Of course,
of
yeah.
that plan.
And you have to understand, you have to understand what it means. Like, it's like, somebody was saying yesterday, in terms of the HR process, I get all of these perfectly written letters, and you know why that is, So we are now becoming attuned to knowing what's AI generated and what's not. And the same for a business plan. You're going to know, like, that's just too perfect. And especially when you ask the person and you interrogate and they just don't understand everything that's in there. It's like making a presentation and you put something on your slides and somebody says, yeah, what does that mean? And you don't understand. You've obviously copy and pasted, or you just never knew in the first place.
Yeah.
So in the end, there's going to have to be rigor to make sure that what is in this plan holds up. And in the end, the investor will, I think, probably, understand that fairly quickly. But also, I think it depends on the type of business and who you're aiming for, because investment means different things. It could be going to the bank for a loan. It could be going to VC for, millions of dollars. It could be going to your friends and families for support, or it could just be kind of showing your customers that you understand them and that this is how it works, So business plans can be used for different purposes. And I suppose if an AI is helping you, I'm imagining that there are certain scenarios like you described there where you just can't do it. You can't afford to do it yourself. If a system could help you and then create something that you can then say, well, that's not right, because when AI generates something, people always have an opinion of, well, that's wrong, or I don't like that, or that should be this. Whether it's 5 arms on a person or whatever, straight away that there's things wrong with it. And you can, I suppose, in the business plan, you could probably see straight away, this is wrong, but actually those things make sense. I would never have thought about that. So it can definitely turbocharge certain activities and maybe fill in things you're less comfortable with doing, especially if it's based on some sort of data or similar types of business plans from other similar scenarios, and that's kind of how AI works. It takes similar things and creates something like that for some other set of input data.
One thing for me about AI is I see it as kind of replace, when the washing machine came in, it replaced the washboard. So someone wasn't there cutting their fingers trying to wash a dress or a jumper or something like that. All the advancements in agricultural technology over the years has made life that bit better for the farmer. They're still working as hard. They're still maybe covering even more land, but they're working more efficiently because there's the technology there to help them. And I see AI is coming in, helping us and freeing up our time to now focus on other things. And before we started recording today, you were talking to me about the freedom that AI could allow us to do in terms of focusing on the more important things in the world, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think there's two things. Like, one is where we are at this point in time, where AI is assisting us to do certain things and saving us time. And like the Old Iron and Colour books I worked on, very much a case of that, where the AI brought you to a certain level and then you could save that time and then use it to make something better on top of that. But then the other is, as you've described, is where the whole task is being effectively done by AI, and then that frees you up to do. A very simple example is the robot vacuum cleaner, we got one a number of years ago and we haven't had to pull out the normal vacuum cleaner half as often when you would be doing that all the time. So it is essentially an AI system because it's moving around, it's learning, it's, detecting surfaces and mapping and so on. It's saving time. And you can imagine many different scenarios where your time would be freed up. You can say to do more important things, but it could be less important things. It could be creativity, but whether that's important or not, you might say, I'm going to, make some music or do some art, perhaps better for the soul and the spirit. Or you might say, I'm going to tackle a problem that's prevalent in Ireland or elsewhere, and I now have the time to do it. So there's obviously challenges with AI. There's the accuracy, there's the energy usage, there's of course, the whole scary Terminator type stuff, if you believe in that. But there is also the opportunity to make the world a better place. And, we do have significant challenges. We know that there are many different things happening that are kind of out of our control. But it would be nice to think that if our time could be freed up collectively, that we could do different things, So let's say an AI was able to do some of the stuff that I would otherwise be doing could I go out and plant some more trees? I know it's silly, maybe it's a simple example. Wouldn't that have a positive effect? Now, of course, you could say, well, your AI is now using up more energy, so you're planting trees. You have to plant a lot of trees before you would compensate for that. But of course, things we can address that challenge in another way. We can say, well, how can we make this more efficient? How can we make AI run better, or just do the things it needs to do, or cut out trivial things? So I think you can think of both sides of that equation.
Yeah, and even the conversation of how can AI help me with your inputting something on ChatGPT, rather than how can we, humanity, use AI to make the world a better place for everyone holistically,
Yeah. I suppose, again, we're used to a certain type of AI now in the past 2 years, and I think our view is probably just limited by what we can see, because ChatGPT kind of went, whoa, they can do that and can do this and do the other. But I suppose if you think of the range of things that a person could do, and if you were able to set some autonomous systems to do that, it would probably be beyond answering some questions or generating some images or so on. It would be more complex tasks. And we see examples, I suppose, from time to time, like the Boston Dynamics robots, the Spot and the robots that fall over and come back up. They're obviously not ChatGPT, but they are learning systems that do something very, very impressive that we kind of take for granted every day. So, for example, waste, and whether it's plastics in the sea or our dumping of stuff or rubbish heaps or whatever, imagine you had systems that autonomously could solve that, that they could go into a rubbish area and separate all of the good from the bad and clean off stuff and reuse it and so on and so on. So imagine, it's the WALL-E example, I guess. WALL-E, the movie, where the robots are going around kind of sorting stuff out, which we don't have at the moment. But if we could, that would be something very, very different from ChatGPT. And that there's kind of something there where you'd say, well, and maybe the AI has helped with people, and you can sort of make a change to the world in a way that we just can't really imagine right now, but that we know we definitely need.
Talking about engineering and social media and entrepreneurship and robots and all that, what came to mind there for me was Elon Musk. Do you think he's good for humanity?
So I was a long-term Twitter user, and I stopped using it in December of last year just because of Elon Musk. I think that as a person, I do not agree in any way with his views and the way he operates. The companies he owns are doing some amazing things. I think you have to look at SpaceX and the chopsticks catching the rocket this week. It was just incredible. And while I think not a fan of Elon Musk, to put it mildly, I would use stronger words. I think the companies he owns do certain very good things. Now, of course, there's a cost with that. People will, so for example, the Tesla Gigafactory being built in Germany, which cut down, I don't know how many trees. It was obscene, the amount of trees. So on the one hand, you have this public perception of electric cars and they're great. On the other hand, you're kind of cutting down forests to make this kind of massive factory happen. And I don't know I haven't read into it in terms of the balance between the good and the bad there, but it sounds bad, in any case. That's I think there's probably dark aspects to some of these companies that maybe will come out in the future or maybe not, I don't know. I suppose that the space exploration is needed. Again, we have to be prepared for the unpopular reality that things may go entirely pear-shaped or will go entirely pear-shaped and we need to go elsewhere. And that's a vision that many people have had I'm a big science fiction reader, so I read science fiction all the time, as much as I can. I'm not sure does it take me away from reality or does it just kind of give me these glimpses of what I was actually describing this a few days ago, because I'm reading a book by a guy called Philip K. Dick, who wrote the Blade Runner story, essentially, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And it's called Divine Invasion. And I just picked out kind of a random from some Philip K. Dick books I have, but it talks about this, I think it's from the late 70s, early 80s. It talks about the global AI. It calls it the big noodle, and that kind of, that's sort of this pervasive AI that's creating AI music artists that it knows a certain portion of the population that are on other planets will like. So it's very futuristic. And we know science fiction writers often have these visions much, much ahead of their time, whether it's Mark Twain or Clarke and so on. They have these very prescient views. People have known for many years that there will come a point in time, and you can read this in sci-fi, that we'll have to leave and expand, whether it's because of exhausting resources or so on and so on, that we need to go to the
asteroid or something.
Yeah, asteroid or whatever else, the virus and all these other kind of catastrophe movie scenarios. So from that perspective, I can see that you need entrepreneurs to think about how we can de-risk where we are at the moment. And there's many companies trying to do this. It just happens that SpaceX and Elon Musk are kind of the most visible. But and again, I don't know a lot, but I also know that Elon Musk has bought into certain companies and kind of taken them over from others who have had divisions, whether it's for electric cars or other activities. So yeah, as a person, I don't like him. That's a nice way to say it. Yeah. And I would feel so strongly about it. I would never buy a Tesla or, and I say I was a major Twitter user.
Because you're one of the first people I know who bought an electric vehicle.
Yeah, and I was an ESB electric car ambassador 10 years ago. So I drove around in this BMW i3, which was kind of a really quirky, cool car that I was fortunate enough to trial with the ESB. And after that, I've had 2 electric cars, and I now have a hybrid electric, which I drive mostly electric. So from that side of things, again, you're hoping you're making at least some impact on the environment. I know there's this whole question of, well, where's the energy coming from and what's the source? At least in Ireland, we have a kind of a balance, that it's starting to become more and more renewables and so on. So you can say, well, at least even if a portion of the energy I'm using to power my car is renewable, that's better than using all petrol.
Yeah. And do you think realistically we'll be moving towards hydrogen-powered cars?
There's probably better people to ask this than me. Rory Monaghan, who's in the University of Galway, is an expert in hydrogen. He does a lot of research in the space, so he would tell you better. There's certain applications, I think, probably where it makes sense, probably more at the larger scale at the moment, boats, buses, and so on. For individual hydrogen-powered cars, it's like the fax machine network. You have to have obviously the supply of hydrogen stations to power the hydrogen cars, and obviously it's great that the hydrogen powered cars just give off water as a byproduct. But making the hydrogen in the first place, there's challenges around the electrolysis process, whatever you want to use to create the hydrogen and the oxygen separately from water. So I think there's probably better mass people carrier applications where you can sort of balance the costs versus the benefit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't know a lot about it, but we're not there yet for sure. However, in the future, if, for example, different types of energy sources, fusion reactors and so on become more available, then suddenly you can say, well, now I can use the energy to split the stuff for low cost. I can store the hydrogen and therefore use it more efficiently. So
because like Doc Brown in Back to the Future was using the fusion with food waste and stuff like that.
Yeah,
he was on something there in the
definitely.
80s.
Yeah. I know we need those, like
flux capacitor.
Yeah, flux capacitor. Yeah, 88.8. I was looking recently at the efforts to retrofit DeLoreans with electric engines or electric motors, I should say, and there's many similar efforts. But the only hydrogen powered car at the moment is the Toyota Mirai. Mirai is the Japanese word for future, and I think there's one from Honda as well, but it's the only kind of one that's probably got some traction, and even that is probably pretty small. I think in France they're starting to roll out a hydrogen network. Japan would be the other big one. I'm not sure what other countries are doing it, but it all comes back to how efficiently can you produce hydrogen. Now, there is the advantage, say, of being able to store it and tap it, solar, storing into batteries, and there's different challenges there in terms of, how long you can store energy and so on and so on. But at least with hydrogen, it's gas. You can store it for as long as you need to in a secure environment, and then you can tap into it when you need to. So there are advantages from that. But it's just production is the challenge at the moment. And I think Rory is a person to ask more about that.
You're aware of a lot of apps that are out there and so on. Like if you go to your website, johnbreslin.com, you can see the various apps that are there on your website that you're connected to. And you mentioned ChatGPT already. And of course, for your the books that you did, which was this beautiful collection of photographs from all over Ireland, and there's 3 editions that you released, of 3 volumes, and this beautiful, it just takes you back in time, and like it's not that it's just a colorized photo. It really it's colorizing a photo, but bringing it back to life so cleanly and pristine. You would have been using AI technology way back then to create that series of books. What do you see as really interesting apps or platforms or something evolving at the moment that you think could be used quite frequently by people in time to come?
I suppose, the ones I think that I would be interested in. So I'm teaching electronic engineering in university, and I often try and think of projects for my students in terms of things I'd like to imagine would be possible, And I mentioned the robotic dogs earlier on from Boston Dynamics, and there's other similar ones, where you have this sort of, now, a bit like the Tesla Cybertruck, people will use things for things they weren't intended for. We saw those being used in war zones and so on, being equipped with guns and so on. The same with the robotic dogs and robotic accessories are obviously being used in military and different applications, which is, what can you do? People will look at technology and figure out a way to use it in bad ways, whether that's the dark web or whatever.
Yeah.
But notwithstanding that, I think if you look at sort of challenges in the world, for example, the aging population, which we're very familiar with in terms of different countries with lower birth rates, and putting the onus on sometimes quite elderly children of the even more elderly to look after them because of just the way things are. Wouldn't it be great if systems could help with that? And I'm thinking of more autonomous robots down the line, companions. There's been many projects in Europe and elsewhere on these sort of robotic companions that are typically some kind of I'm trying to think of kind of a robot, but Robbie the robot from Forbidden Planet, where, they're kind of these sort of bubbly things and they kind of flash some lights and that's it. But you want something that'll, tidy up your dishes and, make your food and so on. And these are emerging. Like, there are systems where you can buy your automated kitchen with a robot that'll basically do a kind of Michelin star type meal because it's just repeating actions. So I think those, and I know I've kind of gone off into a different area. You're kind of asking about apps and so on, but they are applications that would make our life better if they could be used in a certain way. And we know there's also similar types of smart systems that can detect, movement outside for camera systems and all these kind of things. We're using AI to basically recognize objects, the self-driving cars, the vehicles that are making cars safer, whether it's, there's a lot of work done at our university from Martin Glavin and Eddie Jones with the Valeo team on better driving systems. And that's obviously a huge benefit in terms of AI making the driving experience better. Forgetting even about autonomous driving, you're just making it safer to drive from A to B. And that's pervading in our cars already. And then you've got, I suppose, the as I was saying earlier on, if we free up our lives to do more creative activities, you also have kind of apps that allow the kind of more creative expression. And we've seen, obviously artificial art and so on, being created, which can provide a lot of pleasure and enjoyment. So you've got the very practical, I suppose, from assisting people to live their lives to just making people feel better. There's systems to generate music automatically based on certain patterns. I use, I've forgotten the exact name, but a generative music website that basically has taken a kind of a snippet of music and sort of extended that ad infinitum. I have an app, I've had it for many years on my phone from Jean-Michel Jarre, which is called Eon, which is generating his music based on some samples and some kind of combinations of music he's put together, and you can play it again ad infinitum. So there's sort of things where apps are being used to provide enjoyment, and then there's some where they're being used to provide solutions to very kind of practical problems that we have and will have in the future. So I haven't told you the app to use, which is, I think your question was kind of more around, tell me 5 apps that I can use that will make that are coming down the road or will make things better. But I think it is a bigger picture because we often concentrate on the ChatGPT and the sort of the chatbot type stuff. but AI is part of a bigger framework where it can help us and make things maybe run better than we can do ourselves.
No, I think you've broken it down really nicely, actually. As we finish up, we've spoken a lot about where we are today in society and what we expect to happen in the future with space exploration and technology and so on. I just want to finish up by going back to your book, Old Ireland in Colour.
Yeah.
You and your co-author, Sarah Ann Buckley, would have gone through hundreds and hundreds of photographs.
Yeah.
And the 3 books that you put together, you would have worked on over a number of years. Looking back on Old Ireland, what now from today's contemporary world, what have you learned?
I suppose the main thing is people are people. You know, you can look back at these old photographs and you will see faces that resonate with you and you think, oh, they were just people like us now. There is a disconnect between the past because of black and white photographs. And, you know, I'm from that transitionary era where we were still having some photographs taken in black and white as young kids, either by design or, you know, even I have an old kind of photography studio. Some photographer came into my house and the pictures were taken in black and white. So it was that kind of time when, you know, there was still that kind of change happening. And our kids will look at that and say, oh, you lived in the, you know, the time when there was no color, you know, and it's as simple as that. But we also look at black and white photographs and the people do not resonate with us as much as when they are in color. It's simple as that. But they were people just like us. Many of the same traits, desires, characteristics. So I think that it creates a stronger bond, first of all, from that perspective. That's probably the big thing. The other sort of related stuff is that when you colorize a photograph, you start to see things that you did not see before. Things in the background that just were part of the grayness, let's say. And it can highlight a life, you know. So one of the pictures I was showing somebody on Tuesday was of a sweet shop in Waterford, and you see it and you think, oh, they had loads of things there. But when you start to see it in colour, you realise the things they had then that you wouldn't have expected. So this is from 1916. There's some bananas in the window, which again, you'd be sort of thinking, when did they come to Ireland? There are some tins of Alaskan salmon. There's OXO and there's Cadbury's and there's Fry's chocolate and all these kind of things, which on one level you see in the black and white photograph, but you don't really see either. Yeah. And you sort of have the separation of, oh, back then things were so hard. They were hard. They were hard. But you, in your brain, you think they didn't have certain things which they had, or they weren't interested in certain things which they were interested in. It might even be, there's a picture which I colorized some time back. It was from Bundoran, I think, or Ballyshannon, I can't remember which. And there was, it may have been a woman from India, you know. It was sort of that thing of, in terms of, Ireland was all white people, you know, before Phil Lynott and Paul McGrath came. So these things kind of change your perception of how the world was back then. Oh, actually, I have some photographs. I have a picture from the 1890s of a family from Waterford, and I think their nanny was obviously not from Ireland. So you will see different things that you probably just change your perception of how life was when they are in colour. So as part of this kind of process, I've amassed a big collection of glass plate negatives and celluloid prints and you know, black and white prints and so on, which I'm intending at some point in the future to share. And I have a website which is called the Breslin Archive. It's breslin.org, where I've started to share hundreds of these photographs online. Brilliant. So you can view some from Galway, some from I have a nice collection from Waterford, which I also use some of those in Old Ireland colour. But I suppose one thing I could imagine is, can AI help us to preserve the past? At the moment, I'm doing a lot of manual scanning of photographs in the few hours I can find. But I would like to think that if my time was freed up, I would have more time to try and preserve the past. A couple of weeks ago, I was at home in Fanor in County Clare, where my family are from. And my grandfather was the lighthouse keeper in Blackhead, which is just across Galway Bay, in Blackhead Lighthouse. He was actually the first lighthouse keeper. It was built in the 1930s when the transatlantic captains were coming to Galway. They said, we need a lighthouse here in North Clare because it's treacherous there, Blackhead with all of the rocks. So they built a lighthouse there in the 1930s. I have a great picture of him from 1935, standing with the Irish Lights Commissioners and the Galway Harbour Commissioners. But anyway, he kept a logbook for, I would say, probably nigh on 40 years from the 40s to around 1980. And I was scanning in all of the pages just to try and capture and archive it. And of course, it's a hugely manual task. But again, in the future, you imagine, it wouldn't be great if I could shove that at some system and say, yeah, do that for me. And as a byproduct, also be able to preserve things that otherwise would get lost, So, I think the other big impact in terms of Old Ireland in Colour has been that, okay, we've had lots of sales. We've had, somewhere between 100 and 150,000 copies sold of the books. It's been a big thing, which is nice. But it's really been the stories from people in terms of the impact it's had on them, how it's connected generations. I see, and this is a sad but also kind of inspiring thing Old Ireland Colour mentioned when people die, as it's brought to their funeral, or they'll mention in an obituary, she loved her Old Ireland Colour book, and it's only 5 years, it came out 2020. So it's just to think that you've had that impact in such a short amount of time. Similar with boards, as I mentioned earlier, when you hear, again, it's a great source of information and helps people when they come to Ireland to kind of figure out X, Y, and Z, or you're building your garage or doing something on the farm, you get your answers. But it's those kind of human stories in terms of the impact it had. For Old Ireland in Colour, we found that people wanted to use it for a kind of a reminiscence therapy, where essentially people who are having difficulty with their memories, by reconnecting to the past, could be more connected to the present.
Yeah.
And we sent various copies to hospitals to use in, with elderly people to help them with that. So that's, again, something, when I started sharing a few colorized pictures of Galway on social media 5 years ago in 2019, I would never have imagined this would happen today.
It's brilliant, because even sometimes I look at photographs of people in Galway years ago and I think, well, my grandparents might have actually known them.
Oh, yeah.
Spoken to them. And it is that kind of connection with the past.
Yeah. And on the back of our second book, there's a picture from Ballyvaughan, which is near where my family, in fact, some of my family were from around there as well. But I look at a guy and I say, he looks like my cousin. I say, I wonder, is that one of my ancestors,
Yeah.
There was thousands of pictures taken around Ireland by a photographer called Robert French. It's part of the Lawrence collection in the NLI. And they're just some of the most amazing pictures, high definition, essentially, from glass plate negatives. But a lot of records were lost in fires in the Rising, and there's no names, there's no dates. The places are only known because they're actually hard etched onto the negatives themselves.
Okay.
So you're looking at these pictures thinking, who are they?
Yeah.
Trying to find clues. But yeah, as you say, that could be my ancestor's best friend, or could be my ancestor as well. You never know.
Yeah, because there's a photograph in Dad's office at home of my great grandfather's brother in the late 1800s, and I'm like, Dad, he's the spitting image of me. He's like, no, he doesn't look anything like that. And I'm like, no, he's the spitting image of me.
Yeah,
but it's
family sometimes don't see that. Yeah.
No. John, it's been an absolute pleasure
Thank you,
having
Garry.
you in today.
Thanks
you
so
much. Just
I really enjoyed it.
Information and knowledge, and continued success with all the amazing work that you do.
Thank you. You too.